Autumn 1944. Allied air superiority over Western Europe had become so complete that it resembled a natural law rather than a military achievement. American and British fighter aircraft roamed German airspace virtually at will, their formations sweeping across the Reich in numbers that overwhelmed remaining Luftwaffe resistance. The statistics told a story of absolute dominance. Allied air forces flew thousands of sorties daily, while the Luftwaffe struggled to mount meaningful opposition. German pilots, many of them experienced veterans, faced impossible odds. Outnumbered 5 or 10 to 1, short on fuel, flying aircraft that, while capable, offered no significant technological advantage over their opponents. The workhorses of Allied fighter operations, the North American P-51 Mustang, Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, and British Supermarine Spitfire, had evolved into mature, highly effective combat aircraft. The P-51D Mustang, powered by the Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine producing 1,490 horsepower, achieved maximum speeds of approximately 437 miles per hour, or 703 kilometers per hour, at altitude, carried 6.50 caliber machine guns with 1,880 rounds of ammunition, possessed exceptional range enabling deep penetration escort missions, and demonstrated superb handling characteristics that made it deadly in dogfights. American pilots flew Mustangs with confidence born of technical superiority and numerical advantage. The P-47 Thunderbolt, heavier and more rugged, offered devastating firepower, 8.50 caliber machine guns, exceptional dive performance, and the ability to absorb battle damage that would destroy lighter aircraft. Its radial engine and robust construction made it particularly valued for ground attack missions where anti-aircraft fire posed constant threats. British Spitfires, continuously refined since 1940, represented the culmination of piston-engine fighter development, combining speed, maneuverability, and climbing performance in an aircraft that remained competitive despite its pre-war origins. Against these capable fighters, the Luftwaffe fielded primarily Focke-Wulf FW-190s and Messerschmitt Bf-109s, excellent aircraft by any standard, but no longer offering advantages sufficient to overcome Allied numerical superiority. The FW-190 matched Allied fighters in most performance categories and exceeded them in some, particularly firepower and roll rate. The Bf-109G, though showing its age, remained a dangerous opponent in the hands of experienced pilots. Yet these technical near parities meant little when German fighters rose to meet formations of 50 or 100 Allied aircraft, when fuel shortages limited training flights for new pilots, when attrition had depleted the ranks of veterans. Allied bomber crews, protected by these fighter escorts, conducted daylight strategic bombing campaigns against German industrial targets, with losses that, while significant, remained sustainable. The air war had settled into a pattern. Allied numerical and industrial superiority grinding down German resistance through attrition, each month seeing the Luftwaffe weaker and Allied air forces stronger. This comfortable supremacy was about to be shattered by an encounter with technology that rendered every assumption about air combat obsolete. Intelligence reports reaching Allied air headquarters in late summer 1944 contained disturbing information. The Germans had developed an operational jet-powered fighter aircraft. Initial reports seemed almost fantastic, an aircraft capable of speeds approaching 540 miles per hour, or 870 kilometers per hour, more than 100 miles per hour faster than the best piston-engine fighters. Allied intelligence officers, accustomed to German technological innovation but skeptical of exaggerated claims, struggled to assess the threat's magnitude. The Messerschmitt Me 262, designated Schwalbe, Swallow, represented a quantum leap in fighter aircraft technology. powered by two Junkers JUMO-004 turbojet engines, each producing approximately 1,980 pounds of thrust. The Me-262 achieved maximum speeds of approximately 540 miles per hour at altitude, performance that placed it in a category beyond any operational Allied fighter. Its armament consisted of four 30mm Mk-108 cannons mounted in the nose, each capable of destroying heavy bombers with a few hits, firing high explosive shells that compensated for relatively low muzzle velocity with devastating impact effects. The aircraft's swept wing design, though not fully understood aerodynamically by its creators, provided better high-speed handling than contemporary straight-wing fighters. First Allied pilots' encounters with Me-262s occurred in July and August 1944, generating after-action reports that confirmed intelligence assessments. This was not an experimental prototype, but an operational combat aircraft. Pilots described aircraft that accelerated past them as if they were standing still, that climbed at impossible angles, that could not be caught in level flight regardless of throttle settings or dive tactics. A P-51 pilot attempting to intercept an Me-262 experienced the frustration of pursuing a target that simply flew away, the jet's speed advantage rendering pursuit futile. The technological gap was not incremental, it was categorical. Allied fighter pilots, accustomed to slight performance differences between aircraft types, suddenly faced an opponent that operated in a different realm of capability. The psychological impact rippled through fighter squadrons. Pilots who had dominated European skies for months now heard stories of aircraft they couldn't catch, couldn't maneuver at high speed, couldn't engage on equal terms. The Me-262 didn't just outperform Allied fighters, it made them obsolete in direct combat. Yet intelligence also revealed encouraging information. Me-262 production remained limited, operational availability was low, and the aircraft possessed vulnerabilities that tactical adaptation might exploit. The jets consumed fuel at prodigious rates, limiting operational range and endurance. Their engines proved temperamental and short-lived, requiring frequent replacement. Most critically, they were vulnerable during takeoff and landing, when jet engines' slow acceleration left them momentarily at a disadvantage. Allied tactical officers began developing responses, patrol Me-262 airfields, attack during vulnerable takeoff and landing phases, use numerical superiority to position fighters where jets must pass, exploit the Me-262's limited ammunition capacity. These tactics would be tested in the crucible of combat, in encounters measured in minutes that would define the future of air warfare. 0700 hours, a forward airbase in Belgium. December cold penetrated the briefing room where pilots of the 357th Fighter Group gathered for the morning's mission brief. Intelligence officers had confirmed increased Me-262 activity in the sector. The jets were operating more frequently, suggesting either increased production or German desperation to challenge Allied air superiority. Today's mission: escort heavy bombers attacking synthetic oil facilities in central Germany, with secondary orders to engage any Me-262s encountered and to test newly developed counter-tactics. The briefing officer outlined the situation with professional calm that didn't entirely mask the underlying tension. Gentlemen, intelligence reports indicate high probability of jet fighter contact during today's penetration. You'll be facing Me-262s operating from bases near the target area. He gestured to a large aircraft recognition poster showing the Me-262's distinctive profile: swept wings, twin engines mounted beneath, streamlined fuselage. Review your recognition training. The 262 will appear suddenly and move fast. Your closing speed in a head-on pass could exceed 1,000 miles per hour combined. Tactical recommendations followed, distilled from recent combat experience. Don't attempt stern chase in level flight, you can't catch them.
Position flights above bomber formations where jets must climb to attack. Watch for their approach runs. They'll come from ahead or above, making high-speed passes rather than sustained dogfighting. Their 30mm cannons are devastating, but have limited ammunition, roughly 60 rounds per gun. If they miss on the first pass, they may not make another. The technical comparison made sobering listening. Maximum speed, Me-262, 540 miles per hour, versus P-51D, 437 miles per hour, a 103 mile per hour disadvantage. Rate of climb, Me-262 superior at all altitudes. Dive performance roughly equal, though the jet's speed advantage meant it could break off combat at will. Turn performance, Allied fighters superior, particularly at lower speeds, where jet engines' thrust advantage diminished and conventional fighters' lower wing loading provided maneuverability edge. The tactical conclusion was clear. Avoid the Messerschmitt Me-262's strengths, exploit its weaknesses, use teamwork and positioning rather than individual aircraft performance. Your advantages, the briefing officer continued, are number.
The pattern of combat evolved as both sides adjusted to each other's tactics. Me-262 pilots, frustrated by their inability to sustain attacks against the well-defended bomber stream, began making single, high-speed passes and then disengaging completely, landing to refuel and rearm rather than attempting multiple runs. This hit-and-run approach maximized their speed advantage while minimizing exposure to Allied fighters' superior numbers and maneuverability. Allied pilots responded with adaptive tactics developed in real time. P-51 flights positioned themselves in vertical stacks above the bombers, one flight at 28,000 feet, another at 26,000, another at 24,000. This layered defense meant that Me-262s attacking from any angle would pass through at least one fighter layer, creating multiple interception opportunities. The tactic didn't prevent attacks, but degraded their effectiveness. At 0907, 4 Me-262s attempted a coordinated attack from multiple directions, hoping to saturate the fighter screen. The eastern element, 2 jets diving from ahead of the formation, drew P-51s upward to intercept. Simultaneously, 2 more jets attacked from the bomber stream's 6 o'clock, lower and accelerating in a climbing pass. The tactic partially succeeded. The eastern jets drew defenders away from the western approach, allowing the second element a clearer attack run. They fired their 30mm cannons at a B-17 in the low squadron, scoring hits that damaged the aircraft's tail section and wounded the tail gunner. But as they climbed away from their pass, they encountered the middle P-51 layer at 26,000 feet. This flight, led by Captain Robert "Bob" Johnson, had maintained position rather than being drawn into the eastern engagement. Johnson anticipated the jet's exit path and positioned his flight to intercept. As the Me-262s climbed through 25,000 feet, accelerating but not yet at maximum speed, Johnson's flight was already there, diving slightly to build speed, positioned for deflection shots. "Lead element, guns on the right-hand jet," Johnson called, his pipper tracking the Me-262's projected path. He fired a 3-second burst, walking his fire through the space where the jet would be, tracer rounds marking his aim point. The Me-262 pilot, focused on his acceleration and climb, didn't see the attack until .50 caliber rounds struck his aircraft's right wing root. Multiple hits walked across the wing, one round severing a hydraulic line, another striking the right engine's turbine blades, sending metal fragments through the delicate machinery. The Jumo 004 engine, already operating at extreme temperatures and stresses, disintegrated catastrophically. Fire erupted from the nacelle, the engine's destruction triggering secondary explosions as fuel and hydraulic fluid ignited. The German pilot immediately shut down fuel to the damaged engine and deployed his speed brakes, desperate to slow the aircraft and prevent fire from spreading.
His wingman, seeing the damage, moved to escort position as the crippled Me-262 descended rapidly, the pilot aiming for a crash landing in friendly territory rather than attempting to reach his base. Johnson didn't pursue. His flight's fuel state was marginal, and standing orders prohibited deep pursuit of damaged enemy aircraft. The engagement had demonstrated both the difficulty of hitting Me-262s and the catastrophic results when hits occurred. The jet's high speed made them difficult targets, but their engines proved vulnerable, and single-engine flight degraded performance to levels where piston fighters could compete. Time 09:12. 6 more minutes had passed. As the bomber formation approached its initial point for the bomb run, Me-262 attacks decreased in frequency. German jets were landing, rearming, and refueling, a process that required precious minutes. Allied intelligence had identified this as their critical vulnerability, the transition between combat operation and ground operation, when speed advantage disappeared and aircraft became vulnerable targets. Lieutenant Frank Hammer Harrison's P-51 flight had been assigned Airfield Patrol's secondary mission. If fuel allowed, after the bombers were safely on their way home, they were to sweep known Me-262 bases and attempt to catch jets during takeoff or landing. At 09:13, with bombers beginning their approach run and primary escort duty ending, Harrison's flight received clearance to proceed to the secondary mission. They descended from escort altitude, forming a 4-aircraft line abreast formation, and headed toward an airfield intelligence had identified as an Me-262 base. The field appeared below them at 09:15, a single long runway with dispersed hardstands, hangars partially camouflaged, and activity visible even from altitude. Harrison spotted an Me-262 on final approach, gear down, speed reduced to perhaps 180 miles, vulnerable. Target, 2 o'clock low, jet on final approach, I'm engaging. Harrison rolled his Mustang into a diving attack, throttle advanced, speed building toward 400 miles. The geometry was perfect. The Me-262 was committed to landing, couldn't maneuver aggressively, couldn't accelerate quickly. The German pilot, wheels down and flaps extended, saw the attack and attempted to add power for a go-around, but Jumo 004 engines required careful throttle handling, slammed them open too quickly, and they flamed out. The jet accelerated sluggishly as Harrison closed to 800 yards. Harrison centered the Pipper on the Me-262's fuselage and fired, his 6.50 caliber guns converging on the target. Tracers walked into the jet, striking wings, fuselage, and engines. The Me-262 staggered, one engine streaming smoke, but the pilot maintained control, desperate to reach the ground where fire crews could respond. At 400 yards, Harrison fired again, a longer burst that exhausted significant ammunition but tore the Me-262 apart. The right engine exploded, the wing folded upward, and the jet cartwheeled into the ground beside the runway, disintegrating in a fireball of fuel and munitions. Harrison pulled up steeply, anti-aircraft fire from the field's defenses tracking him, 20mm shells bursting in his flight path. He jinked hard right, then left, then climbed at maximum power, his flight following in close formation. They had caught a jet at its most vulnerable moment and destroyed it, validation of the tactic that would become standard doctrine. At 09:17, Harrison's flight exited the target area, anti-aircraft fire falling away as they gained distance. Behind them, smoke rose from the wrecked Me-262, and ground crews rushed toward the crash site. The time was precisely 30 minutes since first contact. The engagement was effectively over. The bomber formation completed its run, turning for home with escort fighters reforming around it. Damage assessment: 2 B-17s destroyed by Me-262 cannon fire, 3 damaged but maintaining formation, 1 forced to leave formation and head for emergency landing in Allied territory. Fighter losses: 1 P-51 damaged by anti-aircraft fire during the airfield attack, pilot unhurt, aircraft salvageable. Me-262 losses, 2 confirmed destroyed, 1 in air combat, 1 on landing approach, 1 damaged and forced to land, status unknown. The raw numbers suggested a tactical draw, perhaps even slight German advantage, given that 2 heavy bombers had been lost versus 2 fighters destroyed. But the strategic implications pointed differently. The Me-262s, despite their technological superiority, had been unable to prevent the bombing mission from reaching its target. Allied fighters, though individually inferior, had developed tactics that degraded Me-262 effectiveness and created engagement opportunities. Most significantly, Allied pilots overcame their initial psychological shock and learned that jets, while dangerous, could be fought and beaten. Back at the Belgian airbase, debriefing sessions began immediately. Intelligence officers questioned pilots intensely, seeking details, exact speeds observed, turning performance, attack patterns, vulnerabilities noted, successful tactics. Lieutenant Doolittle described the dogfight at 0852. The 262 couldn't turn with us at combat speeds. When he tried, we got inside his radius, but the moment he straightened out and added power, he was gone. We couldn't stay with him in level flight or climb. Captain Johnson detailed his successful attack at 0907. We positioned where we thought they'd come out of their CAS. Didn't chase them, that's futile. Instead, we were already there when they climbed through our altitude. Still only got hits because we had numbers. If it had been one-on-one, the jet would have dictated the engagement completely. Lieutenant Harrison described the airfield attack. The jet was helpless on final approach. Gear down, flaps extended, slow speed, committed to landing. Their engines don't respond quickly to throttle changes. We were told that in briefing, and it proved accurate. The pilot tried to go around, but couldn't accelerate fast enough. Intelligence officers compiled the information into tactical bulletins